I do want to say one thing real quick. Just want to make this announcement. I know we had discussed you guys coming on more a bunch this season when we had you on in early September. But I want to let the listeners and the viewers know that Nekias and Steve will be joining us for about half of the episodes of the Old Man and the Three Things moving forward. And Tim Legler has signed on to join us for about half of the Old Man and the Three Things. I really believe this. This show could be and should be the best hoops nerd show in the NBA for this NBA season because you two guys, I think, are excellent at what you do, and Legs, obviously, the way he speaks about basketball. So I'm really excited to host this with you guys, and thank you both for agreeing to do this.
Thanks for having us, man. Really excited.
Steve, you want to say anything before we start? Because you're awfully quiet.
I was going to say thank you. I was hoping Nekias was going to nail the enthusiasm there, but we'll stick the landing. No worries.
My bad.
It's not, enthusiasm is not to be expected of from the guys. All right, let's get into this because look, in some ways, we knew a Dame Lillard trade was going to happen, right? And Joe Cronin waited, months to execute this deal. There's been a bunch of reporting on this, which I want to get to when we start talking about the Blazers specifically. But I think there was a general level of shock across the NBA because I had heard it was going to be the Raptors for a few days, and then the Bucks swoop in. They give up one of their core pieces in Jrue Holiday, and then you immediately start thinking, well, Portland's then going to move him. So let's wait to see what the overall return is. Of course, they still have other pieces they can move in Brogdon, Rob Williams if they decide to go that route. I also think there's a chance down the road they move Jeremy Grant. I don't necessarily think he fits in this timeline with this young group of wing players and guards and DeAndre Ayton. So really, I think an overall great job by Portland. As it pertains to the Bucks, we could talk about Damian Lillard's accolades and his resume, but to me it starts with this. Giannis has never had a pick-and-roll partner like Damian Lillard. As good as Khris Middleton is, we all know I love him. As good as Jrue Holiday is, we all know I love him. Damian Lillard is a different level of pick-and-roll operator. And what this means for Giannis specifically, but also for the Bucks' overall offense, this is incredibly dangerous combo. And I want to get your guys' thoughts just starting there with the Dame-Giannis pick-and-roll.
I think you nailed it on the head. When it comes to Dame and Giannis has not had someone like Dame. Dame has not had someone like Giannis. And so if you think in theory, defenses have to respect Dame. You're not going to give him a ton of space. That's going to open up slips and rolls for Giannis. But I also want to add, Dame being able to play with a Brook Lopez as well, who can pick and pop and roll and finish, also opens up a whole nother thing. You can use Middleton as a screener. Dame can actually be a screener for Giannis. The offensive ceiling for the Bucks is just so high with the amount of things that they can accomplish, and the spacing. It's going to put a lot of pressure on defenses, and I can't wait to see where they go with it.
I think the spacing is the big part for me. Like you already mentioned, there's just a way that you have to account for Dame that defenses haven't had to account for Khris or Jrue, as great as they are. They just don't garner immediate, we got to put two to the ball here, or we have to have our big to the level here, or else. And I think we are going to see a better version of Giannis, or a more prolific version of Giannis as a short roller. I am very excited for Milwaukee, as they do at the end of games, to just empty aside and let those two go to work. Because I don't know what you do with either configuration of that. It's such a dynamic duo. It's very basic analysis, so I'm sorry. But with someone like Dame who can pull up from 30 feet, the way that they can now extend defenses, and you think about the walls that Giannis has been seeing over his career, and the way that teams generally just want to take away the paint and force you to shoot. You can't really do that to that degree anymore. And so I'm just excited to see what it looks like. I made the joke on Twitter, if Adrian Griffin doesn't run Spain with Dame, Giannis, and Khris at some point, I'm going to be very upset. But there are just so many ways that you can use those two. And then Steve, with a great point, mentioning Brook. You can use those two together. Double drag with Dame, Giannis, and Brook. What do you do with that exactly? You switch any of that action. Dame can boogie against bigs in space. Giannis can pulverize you. Brook Lopez can also pulverize you. The options are limitless if they all stay healthy.
Yeah, there's a couple. I want to follow up on a couple things you guys said there. So there's a couple reasons why Milwaukee struggled offensively at times last year. They ended up being 15th, but for a long stretch of the season, especially early on, Middleton in and out of the lineup, hurt, whatever. This was like a 20th, 21st, 22nd offense. And you're like, well, and remember, Giannis had to carry a large load. His efficiency numbers dropped, especially early in the season. And there's reasons beyond just the injuries, right? Prior to that, they were third in offense in 22. They were fifth in offense in 21. And I think the interesting thing you guys bring up is the extension of space, because the pickup point with Dame has got to be higher. The big has to be higher. And to me, what an underrated part of Dame's game is his ability to just attack a big in pick and roll, because the big is so far away from the basket, right? It in similar ways with like Steph, right? You've got to have the pickup point near half court for the guard. And then if they bring the big up to, they bring Giannis, they bring Brook up to set the screen higher, that big can't hang back in the paint, right? He can't play the Brook Lopez drop coverage. He can't play the Jared Allen drop coverage. He actually has to be up. So I think in some ways that is going to make Giannis even better out of rolls. And maybe it's at the level into a drop. Okay, but then the pocket is open. And then it's Giannis making plays, as Nekias said, out of that short roll. So really excited to see that. On the switch, which Nekias brought up, my second spectrum wasn't working because my Wi-Fi is crap right now. So I don't know the exact number, but I know Dame and ISO last year was in the 90-something percentile in the NBA. So Dame and ISO against a switch is not a good answer either. And then the point Steve made up, which I'll be honest, I didn't even really think of this, but he's spot on. The inverted pick and roll, a la Murray setting a screen on Jokic, right? We saw how dangerous that was in the playoffs. I used to do it with Joel. I used to do it with Ben. The inverted pick and roll has become such an important part of NBA offenses when you have a big that can handle and make plays. And then you have an elite guard like Jamal Murray, and in this case, like Damian Lillard. That action is something that I'm really, really excited about.
Nekias, I thought you were going to go on a defensive rant, honestly.
Oh no, I was going with the praise first. I do have some defensive questions to see how Milwaukee deals, but I'm just having fun talking about this offense, man. Thank you for bringing up the inverted point. I would have done so if.
You brought up the Spain point. Let's talk about the defense, because that is the one thing we're going to get into the Jrue trade with going to the Celtics as well. So losing Jrue, who, again, if you ask, I would say 99% of NBA players and anybody who's been guarded by Jrue, they would say on the ball, I think he's the best guard there is. Just in terms of ball pressure, being able to navigate screens individually without a lot of help from the big. His physicality is so important. So you're losing that. And I think the immediate thing is where does the defensive stopper come for the Bucks? Obviously with Giannis and Brook Lopez on the back line, I think in some ways it's less important than it would be for other teams. But is that person Middleton? Is it Connaughton at times? Is it Jay Crowder? Like, where's that defensive stopper coming from?
Yeah, I think heading into the offseason, two fundamental questions I had with Milwaukee was, what does their half-court offense look like in a playoff setting? Like, what kind of space can they open up for Giannis? And then on the defensive end, who is your wing defender? Because I think the problem they kept running into is that they had guys they were okay switching, but ultimately they didn't have a Jimmy Butler guy. They didn't have a Jayson Tatum guy, or to a lesser degree, a Jaylen Brown guy. Jrue is the best option because he's elite defensively, but at the end of the day, like, he's not 6'7", 6'8", so there's still a ceiling there. And I think with the Dame trade, obviously you lift the offensive ceiling, but that defensive question still remains. I think this ends up being a pretty big year for the young guys, honestly. We're going to see what Marjon Beauchamp has. As a UConn guy, I want to see what kind of runway Andre Jackson gets because of his ability to defend and his ability to fill gaps on the other end. But like, I think one of those young wings are going to have to pop for Milwaukee. I don't know what the status of Jay Crowder is at this point defensively. Like, there has been some slippage over the past couple of years. Last year was weird just because he didn't play the first half.
Right.
And so rounding himself into shape, like, I'll give the year of grace there. But ultimately, like, I don't know if he's the answer. He'll be part of a rotation that tries to help solve that problem. But my eyes kind of go to the young guys. Like, and this is a new head coach in Adrian Griffin. I don't know what his philosophy is in terms of giving young guys or young wings leeway in the regular season. So I'm curious to see what it looks like.
I mean, to bounce off Nekias, I think it's going to have to be team defense. I do think there's going to be a little bit more pressure or responsibility put on Khris Middleton defensively. Obviously, we mentioned Pat and Jay Crowder. They can do some of those things. With Dame and specifically, I think, as JJ mentioned, having Giannis and Brook behind him is going to make it similar to what Donovan Mitchell did last year, as far as you had an idea of what his defense was, and then he just had to do his job because he knew he had help behind him. So I think that's going to be a big plus that some people may not be thinking about. But as far as like the pure one-on-ones, I do think Middleton's going to have to increase his level. There may be more rotations, but as Nekias said, we kind of are basing it off last year's Bucks game, and it may not be a complete copy and paste. My idea and my eye goes to, okay, how much of the trade-off is going to be, hey, Giannis, can you do a little bit more for us on ball? Can you be a little bit more active on ball, especially in the playoffs? Can you take some of these matchups? Is that going to be the trade-off as well? Because I think it's got to be a total thing for Milwaukee. It's got to be team defense. And can they rotate more? Can they stay out of rotation? Can they help each other out? I don't know if it's going to be one specific person. They've got to all kind of come together.
Yeah, and that's a great point on Giannis, particularly in some of these matchups as we look ahead, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, but as we look ahead to potential playoff matchups, right? Can Giannis guard a Jimmy Butler for stretches in a playoff series? Can Giannis guard a Tatum for stretches in a playoff? Can they go to those matchups as teams toggle between small lineups and big lineups? And we're going to talk about the small lineup and big lineup when we talk about the Celtics in a second. So I think that's an important point. And the other point you guys are sort of alluding to here is Adrian Griffin is the new coach, right? And we saw for years the Milwaukee Bucks employ a very consistent defensive scheme. Last year, they relied less on help, and they tried to take away more the three-point shot, which they succeeded at because they were always at the top of the league in terms of three-point attempts given up, and at some years three-point makes. Even though they had good defenses, it was all about packing the paint, and they allowed their perimeter players to stay home more and just relied on Brook, who had an awesome defensive year, and Giannis, right? So the point about Giannis, though, I think is the important part. Like, how disruptive if we're going to rely on team defense and we don't have the traditional wing stopper, how disruptive can he be defensively? How much can he match up with other defenders, right? With other big wing offensive players. I think that's all important.